Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Mid-Table Crisis with me, Simon Cross.
And me, Tom Patrick.
Well, let's dive straight into it, Tom. Big story this week, the integrity of our sport is at stake.
Yep.
We should state at this point that this is an ongoing criminal investigation. All parties, as far as I'm aware, deny these allegations, and it's an ongoing criminal investigation, but we've had 6 arrests in connection with spot fixing in our very own British game.
Yep. And some of these players have played in the Premier League. You know, these aren't lower league nobodies. I mean, one or two of them are, but not all of them. You know, some of the names being thrown about Premier League players.
Quite sizable names. DJ Campbell.
Yeah.
Famous for playing pretty much everywhere.
Yeah. Bit like a DJ. You know, you book him, he turns up, he does a job, he goes away again.
Quite incomprehensible, and comes with his own smoke machine for some reason.
Yeah.
It's weird that betting has become that you can bet on like little things like this during a match, like the number of corners, the amount of yellow cards, a certain player getting sent off. It's quite bizarre.
It's almost like they want you to cheat in that kind of way, because that kind of stuff is a lot easier to fix than an entire match, because we are talking about spot fixing rather than match fixing, and it'd be very difficult to fix a match. I mean, because there's 22 players on the pitch. Even if you bribed an entire team, then you know you're not necessarily going to get the exact result you want.
No, there's so many variables, accidental own goals, wind, being a factor. I mean, Arden Bogdan once conceded a goal to the wind.
Yeah, and I think the point about spot fixing is as well, you get very good odds. If you say there's going to be a yellow card between 30 and 35 minutes, you're going to get much better odds than for saying, you know, Blackburn are going to win 2-0.
It's something that you can have a large element of control over, and I think that does make it easy to take advantage of. But the fact remains is that betting in football is a vastly growing phenomenon. I mean, I've just got a little stat here. I was reading a governmental report this week, because, let's face it, I'm that kind of guy. And there has been more spent on gambling in the average British household per week than the cinema, concerts, theme parks, museums, and the theatre combined. Now, that speaks volumes.
Certainly does.
I mean, obviously, it's gambling. I should point out that gambling does include the lottery in this statistic, and all other forms of gambling as well. But nevertheless, it shows that we've become a little bit betting obsessed, I reckon, as a people.
I think a lot of that's due to internet betting. If you've got the cash in your hand, you think more about spending it. But if you're online and you see £100 in an account, you're more likely to chuck it away because it's not real. Well, it is real, but it's not in your hand.
The numbers, a number on a screen just doesn't feel the same. I'm entirely behind you on this point.
Mm-hmm,
and
certainly.
What do you do to stop spot fixing? Because as easy as it seems to be to pull off successfully, how do you see it happening? How do you record it? At what point do you think something's going on here?
I think it's a combination of a couple of things. Mysterious betting patterns. You know, if somebody suddenly plumps £150,000 on a certain player getting a yellow card in a sort of 5-minute window, then you've got to think, is there something going on there? And then if that player subsequently gets a yellow card or a red card, for example, doing something which is quite obvious, quite stupid. I mean, I'm not saying Sam Sodje necessarily received money for his red card against against Oldham, but it was certainly very strange that he, seemingly no reason, punched Jose Baxter twice in the crotch area with no provocation. You know, that's an obvious red card. So when things like that happen, you've got to think to yourself, something's a little bit odd here. You know, when players who aren't necessarily known for that kind of behaviour do things like that, or when something very out of the ordinary happens like that. That's
one way of looking at it. I should once again point out that this is a current investigation, and Mr. Sodje denies, as far as I'm aware, all accusations. So I guess there are already organisations that do look for obtuse and strange betting patterns, and hopefully we can stay one step ahead of these spot fixes, because it will threaten the integrity of our very game. I mean, a player getting deliberately sent off does have an adverse effect on the match, and if people know that kind of stuff is happening, or believe that kind of stuff is happening, they're less likely to want to spend their hard-earned money, go to the ground and watch the game if it's going to be not a fair sporting contest.
Yeah, and I think there's a certain amount of the idea of how much money do they want. Because, I mean, a lot of these games happened in League One and League Two, so the players aren't necessarily on 70, 80,000 pounds a week. But certainly they're better paid than the average supporter. So I think people are get very annoyed by the amount of greed that's being shown by some of these players.
Well, I believe as an ancient Chinese proverb said, greed will consume us all. That's right. I'm also a Chinese philosopher in my spare time.
Ian Curtis said love will tear us apart, and that turned out to be quite prophetic too.
As love will indeed tear us apart, love for a certain political figure has landed two Galatasaray players in hot water.
Yeah, it was very sad to see, to be honest. Didier Drogba and Emmanuel Eboue, two Ivory Coast players, revealed shirts underneath their Galatasaray strips in tribute of Nelson Mandela, who of course died a couple of days ago at the age of 95. And I thought it was honestly ridiculous that they're being threatened with punishment. By the looks of it, I have to say, I think they'll bow to popular pressure, the Turkish FA, and not deal out any punishment. But if they do, it's completely and utterly ridiculous. I mean, I think a lot of it is the fact that Turkey is still a very secular country, and they're not particularly fond of, well, obviously they're not fans of political messages in any shape or form. But certainly there's got to be exceptions allowed. What's your take on it?
Well, to play devil's advocate, the Turkish FA are obeying the letter of the law. Under Law 4 of FIFA's refereeing rules, a player removing his jersey, or in this case lifting up his jersey, which is the same thing, to reveal slogans or advertising will be sanctioned by the competition organiser. The team of a player whose basic compulsory equipment contains political, religious or personal slogans or statements will be sanctioned by the competition organiser or by FIFA. So the Turkish FA legally have their hands tied. They had to say they were going to punish the players because under the letter of the law, it's what they're supposed to do. But we've had precedent with this. In June 2009, when Iran played South Korea in a World Cup qualifier, 7 of the starting 11 wore green armbands in support of the growing Green Revolution movement that was going through at the time. Of course, Iran was going through a general election campaign.
Some of the best Iranian players of the generation were there as well. I know Hashemian and Karimi were amongst them, and they were two very good quality players for the Iran team. And I think it's slightly different, though. I mean, if John Terry lifted up a shirt supporting the BNP, which I'm not suggesting he does, but if he did, then it'd be a different kettle of fish completely to, Drogba lifting up a shirt saying that he, rest in peace Mandela. If the Turkish FA are going to be annoyed about that, then if Kaka went over there and lifted up his shirt to say I belong to Jesus, would they have a problem with that? Would he be punished for that?
Well, technically, when he's doing that, well, the way I understand it, Kaka breaks the rules when he says I belong to Jesus. But it's weird because football and most sports want to never mix well with politics. When politics enters the sporting world, when non-sporting politics enter the sporting world, it never ends up well or works well. So they've worked tirelessly to try and keep the spheres separate. I get the case you've got several thousand supporters as a captive audience to make your point and state your case and your beliefs. And of course the millions watching at home. But at the end of the day, do we really want to see... We watch sport to watch sport, I believe. And...
Not for a political message.
Yeah, not for a political message. I believe they should both be kept entirely separate. And we just focus on enjoying the game. The love of the game is the most important thing. And we can't let that get mired in a certain political stance.
Certainly not, but I'm not sure how politically motivated that stuff was. I think it was just mourning the loss of a great man. Similarly, when Pele dies, I'm sure there'll be people lifting up shirts giving tributes to him. I think it was more people talking about an idol rather than him as obviously he did a lot politically, but he also inspired a lot of people.
Yes. I mean, yeah, you're right, he is an idol, but sadly, and for the letter of the law, he's a political idol. I'm not saying it's the right decision. I'm just saying if they don't enforce this, they set it could create a lot of problems.
It sets a dangerous precedent, but still. Yeah.
I don't want to draw comparisons to the two, but for example, one of the most uncomfortable images as an England fan was the England team giving the Nazi salute, and I believe rules like this will prevent stuff like that happening. And if it means we have to pore over the fine details when someone lifts their shirt to, say R.I.P. Mandela. I think that's an acceptable price to pay in the grand scheme of things.
Perhaps. Hopefully we'll never see such scenes again as we saw in 38, but I understand what you mean. I understand where you're coming from with that one.
Yeah, I obviously didn't want to draw a comparison between Hitler and Mandela.
Yeah, that'd probably get us all the wrong kind of...
Well, they say any publicity is good publicity, but not that kind. Definitely not that kind.
So from one pressing news issue to another one.
Indeed, this is dropped on the day of recording. As we're speaking these very words, this story seems to be gathering pace. A former professional wrestler by the name of Chris Nowinski, who is head of the Sports Legacy Institute, a non-profit organisation which looks into the effects of head injuries on sportsmen, long-term and short-term, has come out and said that all children should be banned from contact sports, or the contact elements of a contact sport, until they are over 14 years old.
So, for example, touch rugby until you get to year 9, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and in terms of football, I wasn't entirely sure what this meant. Because slide tackles, not really to do with heads, but he's come along and said ban children from heading the football until they're 14 years old, which is a very bizarre thing to say. And I don't think it comes from a man with a well-versed knowledge of football itself if he's saying something like this, because heading is a very integral part of the game. You, as a former centre-back, should know this.
Especially the English game as well. I mean, I don't mean to harp on too much about stereotypes, but I know a lot of training in football, especially if you're a defender, is heading the ball away. I remember going to some training sessions and my head was really aching at the end, because if you're heading the ball 50, 60, 70 times in an hour or two, then it is going to hurt you a bit.
I mean, hurt, yes, but long-term damage?
I'd definitely say so in the old days, when a ball would especially when it was wet, and the ball would soak up the water. I know that a lot of families of footballers have linked heading the ball in the 50s and 60s especially with brain diseases such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. I think, was it Jeff Astle? I think he was a famous footballer he was a centre forward, prodigious header of the ball, and he, in his later life, he suffered from a lot of those kinds of problems, and I think his family were one of the most vocal in that regard. But I mean, as you say, I don't think football's as much of a problem as the NFL is, rugby and wrestling as well, because multiple concussions clearly have a damaging effect on people.
Well, Chris Nowinski himself would know this, being a former professional wrestler who had to retire due to post-concussion syndrome.
Yeah, and he obviously knows what he's talking about, but I'm not sure how well his words will be taken, especially in the English game. I'm sure a lot of people just dismiss him as an American who doesn't know anything about football, which is a shame, because I think he's got something, and certainly...
Well, in terms of heading the football, I think he's off base, because your point about old footballers experiencing this, that's all well and good, but the modern footballs are a lot lighter, and they're not the old mud-caked leather cannonballs of the 50s.
They don't retain as much water and therefore as much weight, certainly. So it's nowhere near as much of a problem, and you can see that in the way that footballers from the 80s, for example, don't suffer as many problems as footballers from the 50s and the 60s have. I mean, that's for a lot of reasons, not just lighter balls, but I think in general we're making progress.
We're making progress, but I think there's still a lot we don't know about concussions. I mean, the media had a frenzy last month after the Lukaku-Lloris collision, and he was allowed to play on. I mean, I personally feel that was the wrong call, and he should have been, even though he said he was fine, he should have been taken off. That's definitely my opinion.
Definitely. The issue's reared its head in rugby as well, with players with concussions being taken off the pitch. And apparently there's going to be a new rule implemented. If you have a concussion, then instead of having a mandatory week-long or 2-week-long suspension from playing for your own good, you'll get a few minutes check-up at the side of the pitch. And if the physio or doctor decides that you're okay, they'll throw you back on and carry on playing.
It's weird with rugby players, because you'll see one be completely obliterated in a tackle, not like buried into the turf, and then 5 minutes later he's back on the field, and you've got to think, does he really know where he is or what he's doing? I mean, muscle memory must play a big factor, but is he all there?
Certainly, I think it's a bigger issue for rugby than it is for football, but there are some footballers recently who've struggle with concussions. I know Taylor Twellman, who played for the United States for 6 years, and he played in Germany as well. He's agreed to donate his brain to science after death because it's believed his brain could be a great use to determine whether or not multiple concussions cause permanent harm to the brain. He had to retire in 2010 after a few attempted comebacks. He had a serious concussion in August of 2008, and ever since he's been battling to get back to kind of fitness that he'd need to play. But such were his injuries that he's had to retire. I think he was about 28 when he retired, 29. So he still could have had another 5 or 6 years left in him. And we're talking about an international player. He played his last international game in 2008, the year he got injured. So he could realistically have played at the last World Cup. And he's had to retire because of multiple concussions. So that's certainly one footballer who's had his life affected by it.
It's an interesting. He scored a hat-trick in a game for the USA. He only scored 6 goals in his 30 games, but 3 of them were a hat-trick, which proves that on the international stage he had potential.
Certainly.
So it's an issue where we're a long way off having total clarity in what a concussion does to a footballer's brain.
Definitely.
And it's one that we must advocate and strongly urge that research continue, because the results can be very damaging and debilitating.
Yeah, we saw a massive payout for NFL players not too long ago. That was due to information which had been doctored and other reasons, other withholding of information from players. So to a certain extent, you've got to think how much, we might not know too much about concussions, but how much do the team doctors know? Maybe they know a little bit more than they're letting on. Certainly that was the case in the NFL, and there was about a $70 million payout for these players. So nefarious goings on.
Well, at the end of the day, as much as we love football, it is just a game, and it's certainly not worth risking your mental health over. And I think that's something we're both agreed on.
Yeah, a 20-year career followed by 60 years of suffering really isn't worth it.
You might be forgiven that we've had a bit of a negative attitude this week, but it's not all doom and gloom in the world of football. I believe some of you found out about an interesting new project out in Mongolia.
I certainly have. Now, if you know a little bit about me, you know that I'm a big fan of slightly more obscure football. I prefer an Icelandic derby to a El Clasico, certainly. And my attention was drawn to a book by a young man by the name of Paul Watson, brother of Mark Watson, the comedian. What he and his friend did, they were debating whether they'd be good enough to win a cap for any international team. And they looked into it seriously. They thought of Andorra, who turned out to be a bit too good. And then they looked at some of the other nations, all the way down to...
It's the only time you'll ever hear that Andorra are too good, by the way, I believe.
Yeah. As much as people deride Andorra and San Marino, the average bloke on the street, the average non-league player, he'd struggle to force his way into that kind of team. Andorra only lost 1-0 to Russia, Can you think of many pub teams that had held Russia to a 1-0 draw, 1-0 loss?
No, I am a bit of a loss, to be honest, on that one.
Well, it was a rhetorical question, but okay. And
to be fair, you have a point. It is something I have said in the past, that I could probably walk into the San Marino team, and when you word it like that, you make me look a little bit silly, to be honest.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, obviously, of course, you've got to be from San Marino, but you can naturalise, some people do. Well, not in San Marino, certainly, actually. That's one little point I should say. San Marino, to my knowledge, they've never naturalised a player. There's plenty of players they could have done, but they would rather only use their own than, unlike some other teams which would, take whoever they can get.
Diego Costa.
I was thinking more along the lines of Qatar, for example.
Well, Qatar, Diego Costa is the biggest, most high-profile example in my eyes, playing twice for Brazil, then deciding, I'll play for Spain instead. Players like Puskás and Di Stefano played for 2 different nations, and they're labelled as great. So
Di Stefano played for 3. He played for Argentina, Spain, and Colombia. Yeah, but that was back in the days when you were allowed to, or you weren't necessarily allowed to, but people did anyway. But
we digress.
We do. Yeah, basically, the point is, he wanted to become an international player. He looked around all the FIFA teams. They were all too good. He was a Sunday League player. He wasn't, he was a football journalist as well, so he was a half decent player. He was good enough to play at that level. But he found, as I did, when researching other projects, that there are a list of teams that aren't in FIFA. Gibraltar have recently gone into FIFA, but before that they were a non-FIFA team.
To quote Ghostbusters.
Yeah, they certainly did. And so Paul Watson and his friend Matt Conrad began looking about for non-FIFA teams that would take them. And they got in touch with the Pohnpei FA. Now, Pohnpei is spelled Phonpei. It's a small island. If you know Guam in the Pacific, then it's not too far away from there. It's in the Federated States of Micronesia. So we're talking somewhere to the east of Asia and Australia. Very small island. And
that's a great level of geography knowledge there, Tom.
I do my best. And they did a bit of research, and they spoke to the island's sports minister, who just happened to be in London a couple of weeks afterwards. So they managed to get a meeting with him and were offered the jobs of international coaches, which they took up. And to cut a long story short, the team that had never won a game, they took them to Guam, played 3 games, and they beat a team called the Crushers, 7-1 I think it was. So it was a real success story. And this is with no funding whatsoever. They had to do the lines of their own pitch. One time they came to the training field to find the goals had been broken, and FIFA didn't help them in the slightest. But that was one of their success stories. And now Paul Watson has moved to, I wouldn't say greener pastures, but he's gone to Mongolia, which
colder pastures. Mongolia?
Yep. At the moment, in the daytime, it gets to about -12 in Celsius, so completely utterly freezing. The league starts in May.
Obviously, when things have warmed up a bit.
Yeah, hopefully. So the pre-season at the moment is entirely indoors. So obviously that's a bit of a problem, because you can't really get a feel for the pitch if it's caked in frost. But
I believe you're not allowed to kick over head height in indoor football. That's what we were always taught.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they teach that. This is a team that are going to be in the Mongolian Premier League, so they're called Biangol FC.
So get your shirt orders in, early, lads, before they sell out.
And they are linked to a reality TV show called Dream Team, which will.
Wasn't that on Sky?
Yeah, this is like a Mongolian version, if you will.
Right, I'm with you.
They've been holding televised trials, and from those trials, they're going to select a squad of 21 players. 3 of these players are from the national team, and 3 have never played in any team before. So that's the kind of range they've got.
It's an eclectic mix, certainly.
Yeah, they've got one player he gets up at 5 o'clock every morning to walk miles and miles for training. So they've got some very committed young players. And a lot of these players haven't received any formal coaching, so they've developed a very unique style of football. It doesn't mean they're rubbish. It just means that, for example, they might be very good street footballers. I remember playing 5-a-side against some top quality street footballers, but they wouldn't be able to cut it in 11-a-side. So there's a few rough diamonds.
They do it on a cold, windy night in Stoke.
Yeah.
Although these Mongolians sound like a cold, windy night in Stoke, it'd be like the tropics to them.
Yeah, I'm sure they'd love it. If you want to know a little bit more about Matt and Paul's adventures in Pohnpei and their upcoming challenge in Mongolia, then the film The Soccer Men, which is being edited at the moment by Matt Conrad, is scheduled to be released sometime early 2014. And if you go on Facebook and search for The Soccer Men, you'll find plenty of information about them there. 2 very inspiring blokes, because we're talking about a couple of guys who very little football coaching and very little coaching experience, went over to the other side of the world and took a team that had literally never won a game and took them on a tour where they received their first ever win. And they're not, these are teams that aren't even ranked, so lower than, the American Samoa team that lost 32-0 to Australia.
Oh God, I remember the highlight package of that game. It was didn't the official American Samoa team refuse to play that game, and they had to borrow some boys from a local fishery?
It wasn't quite that bad, but the actual American Samoa team weren't allowed to play because all their passports were invalid. It was something along those lines, and the under 21 team were all sitting their exams, so they couldn't even put out the under-21 team. So I think it was the under-18 and the under-19 teams. So it wasn't a group.
It was literally men against boys out there.
Yeah, there was a 15-year-old in midfield. So, American Samoa aren't the best team in the world, but they wouldn't have lost 32-0. It probably would have been a hammering, but it probably would have been in the teens at most, which doesn't sound a lot, but I've lost 18-0 once, so I'd rather lose 18-0 than 32.
18-0.
My first ever 11-a-side game, it was for my brother's team against a group of lads who were 2 years older than me and a couple of my teammates, and we also had a couple of lads who were 2 years younger than me as well. So our combined age was about half of what theirs was.
Not an ideal situation.
No, and I'd never met half the lads I was playing with as well.
So you couldn't exactly rely on team chemistry either.
Certainly not. But anyway, away from
that. As much as I'd love to make Tom relive his nightmarish footballing past, we must move on to matters on the field. And we must now turn our attention to the blue half of Merseyside. And Everton have proved to be one of the surprise packages of this season's Premier League, establishing themselves amongst the top order.
Yeah, a common criticism of Everton, especially under David Moyes, was that they start slowly. They often tended to take 5, 6, 7 games to get going, which would cost them later in the season. But yeah, one question you raised, you mentioned that one of the problems with this is they're not necessarily going to be able to keep it up for the long haul.
Well, 2 of their best players this season, possibly 3 of their best players this season, if you include the youngster that's just broke for the team, Gerard Deulofeu. They're all loanees. You've got Lukaku loaned in from Chelsea, Gareth Barry, who's brought stability to the midfield in from Manchester City, and of course the aforementioned Deulofeu. Unless they can replace those kind of players next season, this could just be an unusual spike for Everton before they regress to the mean.
I wouldn't be surprised if Lukaku, if he doesn't go back at January. I'm not sure if he's able to, but
I believe there isn't a recall clause, so he is there for the entire season.
That's interesting, because from what I've heard, Mourinho wanted him to stay, but couldn't guarantee him first-team football. So Lukaku said, you can either loan me out somewhere where I'll get first-team football, or I'll leave.
And he has more goals than the rest of the Chelsea strike force combined at the moment, doesn't he?
I wouldn't be surprised, because Eto'o and Torres...
in the Premier League.
Yeah, I'd say so. He's got at least 8. Lukaku, so that's quite a few. And I think a lot of their resurgence has been down to him. And of course Barry shoring things up. A lot of people have a lot of disdain for him. Silverman disdown shirt, certainly. But I know he does do a good job, and he looks better at Everton. I think he's more suited to a club like Everton than Man City, because at the moment he's able to shine a little bit more.
Well, I'm keeping abreast of all the football phone-in shows, and I'm starting to hear people saying, well, if Gareth Barry keeps this up, he may well earn himself a golden ticket, in the sense that he might get a seat on the plane to Brazil.
I would... As you say, I was going to say I'd be surprised, but I wouldn't be too surprised if he keeps at this kind of standard he is at the moment. And if, Carrick's another player who can play that position that he does, a ball-winning midfielder, a deep-line playmaker, that kind of one. But Carrick's struggled a little bit with injuries. So I think we've got to take one player like that, Owen Hargreaves isn't around anymore. We've got to have someone, he could
always try another one of his infamous fitness videos and try and convince us all that he's still got it.
Yeah, he loves through pastels as well. A little reference there. If you manage to get that one, then well done.
That one's right over my head. Like a ball if Chris Nowitzki has his way.
You were never a big header of the ball anyway.
Well, I never really played 11-a-side. So the only form of football I played, you couldn't kick it over head height.
Yeah, I remember the only time you tried a header, you ended up taking me to the ground.
And you will never, ever let that drop, will you?
No. Like a ball that's lofted in within 5 feet of you. You never let it drop. You always got to throw out a limit it and make some sort of contact. Digging
issues at my technical ability aside,
yeah,
I believe with regards to your Gareth Barry point, that I see what you're saying is in that the England squad might be a bit out of reach for him, what with his age and the lack of European level football, I guess, because as much as we hate to say it, those who play in the Champions League have in the past received preferential treatment.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, Scott Parker's not going to make the team, I don't think, at Fulham, and Parker, Carrick, and Barry are the similar moulds of player as you've previously said.
Yeah.
So if Carrick gets injured, he's right up there in my eyes to fill that slot.
Yeah, certainly, but. One thing I've got to say, it's quite interesting to me. Everton have got three different players from three of the top clubs in Europe, Manchester City, Chelsea and Barcelona. Three teams that are considering themselves, Champions League hopefuls.
All won major trophies in the last 2 years.
Yeah. And the fact is they loaned out their players. I mean, Barcelona, it's not so much of a thing for, but Chelsea and Man City loaned out players to Everton, obviously thinking that Everton weren't going to be too much trouble. You don't loan out, Man United wouldn't loan a player to Arsenal because that would be weakening themselves while giving their enemies, a massive boost. So Man City and Chelsea obviously thought Everton weren't going to be too much trouble, and they now stand 2 points behind Chelsea and 1 behind Man City. And, they're fifth. Everton are fifth. And I'm sure no one at City or Chelsea expected that. And it could backfire on them spectacularly if Everton end up, finishing higher than either of them, partially because of their players, especially Lukaku.
I believe that many people thought that Everton would have to go through a period of transition, of course, having lost a mainstay in David Moyes and bringing in Roberto Martinez. But this monumental change doesn't seem to have affected them at all, unlike another famous Premier League case, which I'm sure we'll devote more time to at some other juncture.
Well, one thing you've got to say about Martinez, well, two things. First of all, he's got some contacts, that boy. Second of all, he likes to play attractive football, so it's good to see. I think everyone outside of Liverpool, outside of the red half of Liverpool, is very happy to see it, And I'm glad to see Lukaku getting some playing time, because it'd be an absolute shame if he was on the bench when Torres was starting every game. I'm not saying that would necessarily happen, but it's nice to see him banging the goals in. And he is a shoo-in for Belgium. And hopefully he'll be
especially with Benteke seemingly out of sorts at the moment.
Yeah. So hopefully he can get himself on the scoring sheet in 2014 in Brazil, Lukaku.
Realistically, do we think they can keep this up for the entire season, Everton? Do we believe that they'll stay fifth or climb to the top four in Champions League football, which would certainly give them the money they desperately needed?
If you look at the teams around them, Tottenham and Newcastle will probably be challenging them for that fifth spot. Man United are down in ninth, but at some point I think their season's going to kick in. I think it's probably going to be a bit too late, but Man United, I think they'll. I think Man United will start challenging them towards the end. I think Everton will keep. I think they'll stick about fifth. Maybe occasionally getting up to third or fourth, but I don't think anyone's going to really have them down as title contenders. I think they'll stick around where they are at the moment. Tottenham, they just can't score enough goals. Newcastle, they're on a purple patch at the moment, but I can't see how long that's going to last. And everyone else below that, apart from United, I don't think they've really got many ambitions for the top five.
But in many ways, Everton look the second most complete package in the top half, being behind Arsenal, who finally seem to have, with the two key signings of Ozil and Flamley, have finally seemed to find their balance and their structure.
Yeah, but I think the Arsenal team, as a side note, they'd be shattered if they lost Mertesacker, and they could probably do with another striker as well. They could probably do with at least another defender and probably another striker as well, because that squad's got a very good midfield, and a good quality keeper, but it's quite a thin squad. A couple of injuries could torpedo their season completely.
Well, same could be said for Everton. If Lukaku gets crocked, who have they got up front to replace him?
Yeah, certainly. But
the way they're playing at the moment, they're the most complete packages. Man City can't play away at the moment. They seem to struggle when they're not at the Etihad. Chelsea are dropping points they never would have dropped the first time round under Mourinho. I mean, they lost to Stoke.
That's an odd one.
Man United are going for a really rough spell at the moment, but as I believe they'll turn it round.
Yeah.
Tottenham are going for a different kind of transition, but that's more squad-based than player-based, than manager-based.
Yeah, I know what you mean with that one. I think Tottenham, a bit like Man United, are waiting for their season to sort of they're waiting for it all to click into place. And when it does, when those players start firing, there'll be a formidable force. They could literally beat anyone on their day, to use a cliche. So
I have a £10 bet with one of our celebrated listeners, Mr. James Ison, that I said that Arsenal will finish higher than Tottenham, and he thinks otherwise. He thinks Tottenham would finish higher than Arsenal this season. I personally believe my money's safe. Next season, I'm not entirely sure I'd make the same bet.
That's a foolish bet for the Iceman because, Arsenal have just...
I think he melted under the pressure.
Yeah, I'd say so. Bag of water as he is. Yeah, I don't understand why he'd do that. I mean, he is a United fan, so maybe he just wanted to see Arsenal fail. But Tottenham, yes, they've got a good team, but they're not playing as a team at the moment. They just can't seem to score. They're sixth, but they've got a goal difference of -1 after 15 games. That is.
Well, that shows how no one's at the moment. It's a lot like the political situation at the moment in my eyes. No one's good enough to win the general election, and I don't think anyone's been good enough to lay claim that they can win the Premier League, with possible exception of Arsenal.
Yeah, I mean, some United fans are still saying that Arsenal aren't even a consideration, but if it stays like this for another month, then we'll see what they say.
Some United fans may be saying that, but I think that's more out of spite and bitterness than generally looking at the table.
Yeah.
I know many United fans may not want to look at the table at the moment, but they would do well to remember that this is a time of transition.
Yeah, Fergie needs a lot of time. He was one game with him being sacked, apparently, and Mark Robins' goal saved him. Look what happened
Mark
there.
Robins, of course, noted for his...
Mark Robins, the former Coventry manager who abandoned us. Well, he joined halfway through a season and then left just before the end of it. But we got Elvis in, and he sorted things out, so good lad. Good lad, Elvis Presley.
Elvis being Stephen Presley.
Yep, played for Cov as well, played for Scotland, played for Celtic, won 3 Scottish League Cups.
So it's nice that he got a trophy at some point in his career then.
Yeah.
So, we seem to have covered the entire Premier League at the moment. Well, the top half.
Yeah, Sunderland are maintaining their dodgy form. A 2-1 home loss to Tottenham. Sunderland, they just don't seem to be getting much look at the moment. They're not playing particularly well, but they're just not getting the rub of the green as well. There's been a few games where it's been a case of they could have easily snatched a point. Or
there's an overwhelming amount of own goals whenever you look at a Sunderland score.
O'Shea got one at the weekend, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, mind you, they should have had a penalty at the weekend. I mean, Sandro's handball, it's akin to Maradona's in '86. It's so deliberate.
Did he score with it?
Alright, alright, yeah, I see your point.
Yeah.
In terms of how deliberate it is, he's just slapped the ball out of the air. If he was a cornerback in the NFL, that'd be a textbook play. But he isn't. He's a central defensive midfielder, and he should do well to remember that heading the ball does not do anyone any harm.
Yeah. I think it's 5 own goals so far this season. They've had 5, which is a hell of a lot. But our older listeners may remember the Sunderland squad. I think that it was the squad that garnered 15 points. 3 own goals in one match. This is a tricky one. Stephen Wright, Kevin Kilban. Who was the other one? In fact, that can be an early trivia question for you, because I don't know the answer.
God, getting our listeners to do your research.
Yeah,
Shame on you. Shame on you.
That's what Pete Donaldson does on the Football Ramble, and he gets paid for his stuff, so I don't feel any shame.
Well, yeah, fair enough. I mean, if he's taking a paycheck for it, we may as well do it when we're getting sod all for this.
Yeah. I make more money sucking cock.
Oh. So, Sunderland, not looking bright.
Stadium of Light not looking too bright, as you might say if you were former Sheffield Wednesday striker Mark Bright. But go on.
Bright, of course, also played for Crystal Palace, and they seem to have enjoyed a mini resurgence under the new guidance of Tony Pulis.
You were gleeful at that, weren't you? Jesus. He loves his...
Oh, I'm grinning like a Cheshire cat right now, mate.
I can't see you. Where have you gone? Oh, we need friends. Palace.
Anyway,
yeah.
Crystal Palace.
How much of it do you think is the whole getting in a new manager? He bumps you up a few places in the league. How much of it is just, they've finally started to play football?
The dead cat bounce, or getting a new manager in when you're struggling, phenomena is well documented. It's proven in a celebrated statistical wonder, The Numbers Game.
Yeah, good book.
Lovely book. I believe that once it's the same that's happened at Fulham, which is another good example. The new managers come in, they've realised I think players realise there's an opportunity to impress.
Yeah.
I mean, one particular player that's had to do a lot of impressing was Cameron Jerome, who was very critical of Pulis once he'd left Stoke, and then found himself playing under Pulis' guidance once Pulis took charge at Palace.
Yeah.
But he seems to have scored a couple of goals, and he's showing glimpses of the player that he once was rumoured to possibly become, which is a very convoluted way of saying he's getting a bit good again.
Yeah, I was going to say that was that was a bit of a maze of semantics, but I kind of get.
Well, the motto of the mid-table crisis is why say one word when you can say 25?
Yeah. I thought the motto is why say one word when instead of saying one word you could say 25 words, which avid listeners will know is exactly 25 words long.
You love a good stat, a word-based stat.
Well, I'm the one who panders to our stat fans. Hello, stat fans. I've got some more for you later. So you've got to know your audience.
That's true. And in many cases, we physically know our audience. No, we actually know our audience.
Physically know our audience? Have you had sex with some of our audience members? Are you using your fame from Mid-Table Crisis to garner man love? What kind of sick person are you? This is surely an abuse of power.
All I'm saying, Tom, is it has been a while.
This is the equivalent of a Catholic priest getting his knob out in the communion chamber. Good Lord.
No, you'll end up with Operation U-Tree knocking at my door. Stop this. Stop this now.
The contents of your laptop, I think we all need to have a quick look at what's in there.
Anyway, Fulham have seemed to have enjoyed a bit of resurgence under René Mullenstein.
Yep, he said that first time. Good stuff. He's an interesting bloke as well. Accent-wise, he's Dutch, but he's kind of got a bit of Scouse, maybe a bit of Manc in his voice, a bit of Manc accent, and then a little bit of Cockney at strange points as well. It's an odd kind of thing to hear, but I enjoy listening to him, and I enjoy watching his teams play, to be honest, because
the irony of saying an odd thing to hear when you're listening to a Mid-Table Crisis podcast is limitless, practically limitless.
An odd thing to see when you open a friend's laptop is a man filleting a goat, but that's slightly higher up on the list of odd things. But yeah, 2-0 win over Aston Villa, lovely stuff. I've never been a fan of Villa, and Berbatov's penalty as well. Oh, burn! Get that man some ice. He sold the keeper completely the wrong way and planted it in the right spot. Gorgeous goal. I mean,
with a slight hint of bias, being a Coventry fan, but I get your point.
And there's not too much wrong with those teams' players. I think a lot of it's morale. And, under Yol, they didn't seem to want to play necessarily. They were playing at perhaps 50% of their potential. They've got a team. I'd say they've got 10 players, at least 10 players that are good quality Premiership players.
And Philip Zendros.
Yeah. Who is a favourite, but probably a little bit past.
I don't know why.
Yeah. But, some of their players, De Jager, I like the look of. He looks like a good player. Damien Duff, yes, he's getting on, but he'd still do you a job. Brian Ruiz, Berbatov, if you can get those players. Well, Taarabt is a bit of a sticking point for me, but Taarabt and Berbatov are similar kind of players in that on their day they can change a game, but if they don't look up for it, then they leave gaping holes.
I made a similar point in a conversation with a friend about Berbatov and Bent. It struck me as weird they signed both those strikers they bought both those strikers in, because both of them are very much poachers, and to try and play them together just struck me as quite an odd phenomenon.
I wouldn't necessarily say Berbatov is a poacher, but I think what you mean by that is that he doesn't work too hard for the team. He wants to be supplied, and then he'll apply the finishing touch, rather than what you would want, maybe more so, is alongside Bent, you'd want a target man. You'd want someone to knock the ball down to him for him to run onto, because he's pacey, he's got a good finish on him. And Berbatov's not necessarily going to do that. Berbatov wants people to pass the ball to him so he can apply the finishing touch.
The same thing.
Yeah. So, yeah, they've got two players who are goal scorers more than they are providers. I
am taking, by calling Berbatov a poacher, I did take the glass half full approach to Berbatov's work ethic, I admit. But, but they seem to have turned it, as I say, the players seem to be playing more for the new manager. So they might yet find themselves out of trouble.
I certainly hope so, because I've always liked Fulham, ever since the days of Brian McBride and before. So I hope they do a Fulham and manage to worm their way out of it.
Yeah, but there's a lot of games coming up in a short period soon. So it'll be interesting to see how things develop definitely after as we head into the new year. And of course the January window where everything could yet change again.
Yeah? Who knows what will happen?
The great politician and scholar Benjamin Franklin said there are only two things that are certain in life. Death and paying taxes. And to that list we can now add Tom's trivia. Go for it, Tom.
And of course this is quite taxing and may feel like you're dying at the same time. So that's a nice little way to talk about it, to be honest. But this week we have a look at someone who is considered a hero in many parts.
Some would say a cult icon.
I'd say a cult hero, yes. But I'm going to give you slightly less clues this time because some people have complained that the last week.
Well, people complain about all sorts of things.
Yeah. I mean, this is our monthly anniversary, and it's nice to receive some good comments in amongst all the hate mail. But
less bombs. Please stop that, by the way, guys.
Yeah, half of those were me, to be fair, mate. So I take full responsibility. So this week is going to be a little bit tougher in that I'm not going to give you quite as many clues, and I'm going to be a little bit more vague about certain things. But we start, as ever, with the date of birth. I was born on the 12th of December, 1974. Which means, of course, that it was my 39th birthday yesterday. I started my career in South America, in the second division of my home country. I moved to Argentina in 1997, playing alongside Diego Maradona. I moved to a club in the northeast of England in 1998. Having left in 2004, I returned a year later to a hero's welcome. I played for one more English side, and then did a tour of the world, ending back in the northeast. I played 95 times for my national team and scored 20 goals. I was a versatile player, being able to play at fullback or in midfield. And I am also an accomplished musician. But the question is, who am I?
Lovely stuff.
As usual, send your replies into midtablecrisis@gmail.com. You can comment on YouTube. You can comment on this video. You can basically, you could do whatever you want.
Send us a tweet at midtablecrisis.
Yeah, follow us on Twitter, and then you can send us it in a tweet. Last week's winner was Jack Johnson, who correctly guessed David Batty, which was a massive surprise considering Dave the Rave was sitting next to me at the time. Big fan of the Batty, of course, Dave. And
we don't let guests guess, do we?
No, but there was obviously a Leeds theme to last week.
The same reason that I couldn't guess. Well, that being I don't know it most of the time. But anyway.
And we move on. Having totaled up the votes, Asia is the winner of our little competition, so I'll be managing a club in Asia. Now, to make it a little bit more interesting, I'm going to give you 3 nations in Asia, and whichever one gets voted to the top, I will manage. And from there, we'll get going with it a little bit more. I'll start signing a few players, I'll play a few games, and just to sort of get into it a bit more so people can see how it's developing. The 3 nations are, and I will manage a club from these leagues: Indonesia, South Korea, and China. So that's Indonesia, South Korea, and China. Which one of those countries do you want me to manage in? As usual, answers to Twitter, to Facebook, to the Gmail account, or tell me in person, or write it on your walls in your own feces.
Or pigeon mail.
Pardon?
Or pigeon mail. And we have recently set up a Telegram post.
We have indeed. We say Telegram post. It's a man tied to a post, and he's been bummed 18 times. And now, a new exciting feature. Our monthly book club. And it's not going to come as a massive surprise, but my book this month is Up Pompeii. which is, of course, by Paul Watson. I mentioned it earlier in the show. And it's just a cracking read. If you know anything about football, if you don't know anything about football, if you want to be inspired to do something with your life, it's just top quality stuff. Very funny as well. Heartwarming. So yeah, please give it a read. It'll make your life better.
And of course, you might be inspired to take on a challenge like that yourself.
Yeah.
And find yourself grabbing your passport and jetting off to far-flung Siberia or the tropics of Mauritius and setting out on your own footballing odyssey. A dulcet tone still ringing in your ears. This has been Mid-Table Crisis. I've been Simon Cross. I still will be Simon Cross next week.
I've been Tom Patrick. I may still be Tom Patrick next week. Tune in to find out.